The Western Pacific has become one of the most heavily instrumented military spaces on Earth. Satellites pass overhead on regular schedules. Commercial imagery companies sell photographs of airfields to journalists and researchers within days of a new construction project breaking ground. Open-source analysts compare radar, cross-sections, and runway lengths the way analysts once compared shipping manifests. In this environment, a fixed military asset is, by definition, a known military asset. That single fact has come to shape almost every serious military investment China has made across its coastal provinces over the past decade, and it is the starting point for understanding why Chinese military planners have spent so much attention on a problem that sounds almost mundane: how to keep an air force flying when its runways are already on someone else's target list. For most of the 20th century, air power depended on large, fixed installations. A modern fighter wing needs long runways, deep fuel storage, munitions, bunkers, radar coverage, and a logistics tail that can take years to build. Those requirements make an airbase easy to find and, in an era of satellite-guided missiles, comparatively easy to disable. A runway does not need to be destroyed outright to be neutralized. Cratering a strip in a handful of places, or damaging its taxiways, can ground an entire squadron for days, even if every aircraft on the base survives untouched. Military planners in Washington, Taipei, and Beijing have all reached the same conclusion from this reality. The ability to keep aircraft flying after the first missile salvo may matter more than the aircraft themselves. This is the strategic backdrop against which a set of unusual disclosures out of China should be understood. Over the past year, Chinese state media and semi-official military outlets have intermittently published, and in some cases quickly deleted, imagery and footage describing new approaches to getting armed drones into the air without relying on conventional airbases. The most widely discussed of these was traced to the Beijing Institute of Technology, a university with long-standing ties to China's defense industrial establishment. Footage that circulated in mid-2026 showed a truck-mounted electromagnetic launch system. Several large flatbed trucks, each carrying a section of catapult rail, mechanically linking together to form a single continuous launch platform capable of flinging a fixed-wing drone into flight from what otherwise looked like an ordinary stretch of pavement. The footage disappeared from official channels not long after it appeared, a pattern that has become familiar with sensitive Chinese military disclosures, but not before it was captured and analyzed by regional media and independent defense researchers. To understand why this matters, it helps to trace the longer history of using roads as runways, a practice considerably older than the current generation of drones. The concept dates to the closing years of the Second World War, when Germany's developing Autobahn network offered long, straight, paved sections that could double as emergency airstrips if conventional bases were destroyed. During the Cold War, the idea was adopted on both sides of the Iron Curtain. West and East Germany built dedicated highway strips, complete with removable center barriers and nearby equipment depots that could convert a stretch of motorway into an operating airbase within a day or two. Sweden, Finland, Switzerland, Poland, and Czechoslovakia built similar systems, as did North Korea, South Korea, and Taiwan. Singapore still exercises the concept periodically with its air force. India has built and tested several road runways on its expressway network in the years since 2015, citing the need for rapid military mobilization near its borders with Pakistan and China. China's own experimentation with highway strips goes back to September 1989, when a J-7 fighter conducted the country's first landing on the Shenyang-Dalian Highway, at the time China's newest long-distance expressway. Over the following decades, the People's Liberation Army built more than 10 such strips across provinces, including Liaoning, Shandong, and Fujian, and extended the concept into China's northwest in 2004. In 2014, PLA aircraft conducted a further round of tests on a highway in Hainan province, described by the military command that ran the exercise as a way of improving coordination between civilian transport authorities and the Air Force during emergencies. These exercises were framed publicly as dual-use infrastructure, useful for disaster response as well as military contingencies, a framing that mirrors how India, Singapore, and other countries have described similar programs. Standard highway strips of this kind typically follow a common design regardless of country. A straight section between 2 and 3.5 kilometers long, A removable central barrier so the full width of the road can be used, reinforced pavement able to bear the weight of a fighter jet, and equipment stored nearby that can be brought in only when the strip is actually needed. Most such strips can be converted from an ordinary road into a functioning airbase within 24 to 48 hours. What changed in 2026 was not the underlying concept of using civilian infrastructure for military aviation, but two specific shifts layered on top of it. The first was a shift in emphasis from full-sized crewed aircraft, which still need long, prepared strips and trained pilots, towards smaller, cheaper, expendable uncrewed systems that can be launched with far less runway and far less advanced preparation. The second was a shift from a fixed strip, built, marked, and known in advance, toward a genuinely mobile system that requires no dedicated road markings at all and can, in principle, operate from almost any stretch of paved highway a set of trucks can reach. That second shift is the more significant one from a targeting standpoint, because a fixed highway strip, however disguised, is still a mapped location that shows up in the same kind of satellite surveys that have tracked China's permanent air bases for years. A launch system that assembles itself from ordinary-looking trucks and can disperse again within minutes removes that fixed signature almost entirely. The context for that shift is the buildup of China's airbase infrastructure directly across the Taiwan Strait, which has been documented extensively through commercial satellite imagery over the past several years. Analysis published by the Hudson Institute in early 2025 concluded that China had constructed or upgraded 134 airbases within roughly 1,850 kilometers of Taiwan, supporting close to 650 hardened aircraft shelters, structures designed to protect individual aircraft from all but a direct hit. Independent imagery analysis from the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, along with reporting attributed to Japan's National Institute for Defense Studies, has further identified an unusual pattern at some of these bases: the presence of older, 1960s-era J-6 fighters positioned alongside modern J-16S. Because the J-6 has been out of frontline service for decades, researchers have concluded that many of these aircraft have likely been converted into unmanned, expendable strike or decoy drones, sometimes referred to informally as J-6W. Reuters reporting in March 2026, citing the Mitchell Institute, put the number of such converted aircraft at over 200, spread across 6 airbases near the strait. This is the operational picture that mobile, truck-based drone launchers are designed to complicate. A fixed airfield, however well defended by hardened shelters, is still a fixed point that can be mapped, watched, and ultimately targeted with enough precision munitions. A launch system that can disperse across a highway network, link together in minutes, fire a drone, and then disperse again before a strike can be organized against it, presents a fundamentally different targeting problem. Taiwan has, over the past decade, developed long-range strike systems specifically intended to reach air bases on the Chinese mainland, including the Xingfeng Tai-E cruise missile, credited with a range of roughly 600 kilometers, and extended-range variants said to reach as far as 1,200 kilometers, sufficient to hold at risk PLA airfields well inland from the coast. A dispersed, mobile drone launch capability would, at least in theory, reduce China's reliance on the fixed bases those missiles are designed to strike. Whether that theoretical advantage holds up in practice is where informed analysts disagree, and this is a question worth treating carefully rather than resolving in either direction. Some regional defense commentary has described the mobile launcher as a genuine hedge against the vulnerability of forward airbases, and has noted that Beijing Institute of Technology has framed the underlying containerized launch technology as having a dual purpose: national defense on one hand, and an export product aimed at Belt and Road Initiative partners and other states priced out of conventional air forces on the other. If that export dimension proves real, the same logic of cheap, distributed strike capability could spread well beyond a Taiwan Strait contingency and into a wider set of regional conflicts. Other specialists take a more skeptical view of how much dispersal alone can achieve. Research from the Stimson Center modeling Chinese missile and rocket strikes against Taiwan's own airbases has argued that dispersal, including onto highways, does relatively little to solve the underlying problem once an adversary has sufficient intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capacity, because moving assets to unprepared civilian sites exposes them to a different set of vulnerabilities, including the absence of hardened shelters and dedicated repair equipment. A parallel argument has been made about the United States Air Force's own dispersal doctrine, known as agile combat employment. Analysts at the Hudson Institute, including Thomas Shugart and Timothy Walton, have argued that dispersal without hardening is an insufficient answer to modern Chinese targeting capability, on the reasoning that a purely mobile force can still be tracked and struck once it reaches a new location, particularly if that location offers little in the way of passive defense. Applied to China's own truck-based launchers, the same logic suggests that mobility complicates, but does not eliminate, the targeting problem, especially against an adversary, such as the United States, whose intelligence and strike architecture has been demonstrated at scale in other recent conflicts. This same hardening versus dispersal debate has played out inside the United States military establishment, and it is instructive because it shows that the trade-off China is navigating is not unique to Chinese doctrine. The United States Air Force has developed a concept called agile combat employment, under which small teams of personnel and aircraft spread out from major hubs to smaller, more austere airfields in order to avoid presenting a concentrated target. Analysts who track this program closely have argued that dispersal by itself is not a solution, since an adversary with sufficient surveillance capability can simply track the dispersed assets to their new locations and strike them there, particularly if those new locations lack any of the passive defenses, such as hardened shelters or camouflage, that a permanent base would have. One senior researcher summarized the concern by noting that spreading out without also hardening or concealing those new positions can mean moving valuable assets to places that are, if anything, easier to defeat, because they arrive with none of the protective infrastructure of the main base they left behind. The same logic applies in reverse to China's mobile truck launchers. Mobility alone does not guarantee survivability, and its value depends heavily on how quickly a launch site can disperse relative to how quickly an adversary's intelligence and strike systems can detect, confirm, and engage it. There is also a cost dimension to this debate that is easy to overlook amid discussion of exotic launch technology. Much of the drone force China has been building, including systems such as the CH-4, the WZ family of reconnaissance and strike platforms, and the widely distributed ASN series, is deliberately low cost relative to the interceptors that would be used to shoot such drones down. Taiwan's principal air defense missiles, including its domestically produced Skybow system and the American-supplied Patriot PAC-3, cost many times more per unit than an expendable drone. Defense analysts covering the Indo-Pacific balance have pointed to this asymmetry as one of the more consequential aspects of the drone buildup. A defender forced to expend an expensive interceptor against a cheap, mass-produced drone loses the exchange in economic terms, even in cases where the intercept itself succeeds. A dispersed, truck-mounted launch capability magnifies this effect by allowing a much larger number of low-cost drones to be fielded from a much larger number of launch points, which increases the total number of threats a defender must track and engage simultaneously. The broader naval dimension of this technology is worth noting as well, since the containerized nature of the launch system means it is not limited to paved highways. Chinese officials and state media have suggested the same basic launch mechanism could be adapted to coastlines or civilian vessels, converting ordinary ships into makeshift drone carriers on short notice. Testimony delivered to the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission in March 2026 placed China's battle force fleet at roughly 400 ships and 60 submarines, already the largest navy by hull count in the world. Naval analysts who study fleet-on-fleet combat, including a frequently cited 2023 argument from Sam Tangradi in the U.S. Naval Institute's proceedings, have suggested that in protracted, high-intensity conflict, larger fleets tend to prevail over smaller, more technologically advanced ones because sheer numbers provide more sensors, more platforms to absorb losses, and more capacity for saturation attacks that complicate an opponent's ability to track and respond to every threat. A drone launch system that can be distributed across a large number of ordinary-looking civilian vessels would extend that same numbers-based logic into the air domain, adding a layer of unpredictability to any American or Taiwanese effort to map China's available strike capacity in advance of a conflict. None of this development is occurring in a vacuum, and Chinese military planners have had an unusually direct, real-time case study to draw on while refining these ideas. The extended American and Israeli air campaign against Iran, formally named Operation Epic Fury by the Pentagon and launched at the end of February 2026, has given Beijing an extensive window into how the United States actually conducts a high-intensity air war, from munitions, consumption rates, to the use of artificial intelligence in target selection and strike coordination. Chinese military media has published detailed internal analyses of the campaign, and specialists tracking the People's Liberation Army, including researchers at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, have noted that lessons drawn from both the Iran campaign and Russia's war in Ukraine appear to be feeding directly into China's own doctrine on distributed, expendable strike systems, including the truck-mounted and vehicle-mounted drone concepts unveiled over the past year. At the same time, some regional strategists have argued that the demonstrated pace at which the United States has expended precision munitions in the Iran campaign, alongside strain on American air defense interceptor stocks, may be shaping Chinese calculations about the timing of any future move against Taiwan, though this remains a matter of informed speculation rather than confirmed intelligence. And officials on all sides have been careful not to draw a direct causal line between the two theaters. Taiwan's own response to the broader drone threat, not limited to the truck launcher question specifically, gives some sense of how seriously the island's defense establishment takes this trajectory. Taiwan's defense ministry submitted a report to lawmakers in March 2026 outlining what it calls the T-Dome, a layered air defense architecture intended to draw explicit lessons from both the Ukraine war and Operation Epic Fury about the need for low-cost interceptors capable of handling drone swarms rather than relying solely on expensive, limited inventory missiles. Taiwanese officials working on the island's drone program have also spoken publicly about the need to build a domestic, non-reliant supply chain for drone components, so that manufacturing capacity for Taiwan's own layered defense systems does not depend on components that could be cut off before or during a contingency. These efforts reflect an underlying recognition on Taiwan's side that the contest is not simply about which country has more advanced individual weapons, but about which side can sustain production and replacement of cheap, attritable systems for longer, a question that maps directly onto the economics of the truck launcher concept described earlier in this account. It is also worth setting this development against China's overall military spending trajectory, since a single new weapons concept means little without the industrial capacity to produce it at scale. China's official military budget grew by roughly 7% in 2026, reaching approximately $277 billion, a figure that, while smaller than the United States' overall defense budget, buys considerably more within China's own economy, given lower labor and manufacturing costs. That budget growth has coincided with a period in which Chinese state media has published unusually detailed internal assessments of Operation Epic Fury, examining everything from the role of artificial intelligence in American, targeting to the effectiveness of decapitation strikes against leadership, and Chinese military parades over the past year have featured drone systems mounted on armored vehicles, a configuration that some Western analysts have linked to lessons drawn from Ukraine's use of similar systems. None of this proves that any specific decision about Taiwan has been made in Beijing. It does indicate that the drone and dispersal concepts under discussion here are being absorbed into Chinese military planning at a level well above a single university's engineering department. The practical consequences of this line of development are likely to unfold on several different timescales. In the near term, a credible mobile drone launch capability forces any adversary planning a first strike against Chinese air power to widen its target list considerably, since a strategy built solely around hitting known, fixed airbases would leave a portion of China's strike capacity untouched and available for follow-on operations. That, in turn, raises the number of precision munitions such an adversary would need to hold in reserve for an opening phase of conflict, a consideration that is already the subject of public debate in the United States, given reported shortfalls in stocks of long-range missiles such as the Tomahawk, whose production has struggled to keep pace with the consumption rates observed during the Iran campaign. In the medium term, if the export dimension of this technology develops as Chinese state media has suggested it might, the same containerized, truck-based launch concept could proliferate to a wider set of states aligned with Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, extending a cheap, dispersed strike capability well beyond the immediate context of a Taiwan contingency and into other regional flashpoints, where conventional air forces have historically been out of reach for smaller states. In the longer term, the underlying contest here, between an attacker's ability to detect and strike dispersed, mobile targets, and a defender's ability to hide and move them faster than that detection cycle can operate, is likely to remain one of the defining technical races of Indo-Pacific military competition for years to come, regardless of how any single generation of hardware performs. What can be said with confidence at this point is limited but specific. Chinese state-linked institutions have demonstrated, at least in prototype form, a mobile, containerized drone launch system capable of operating from ordinary road surfaces. Independent satellite imagery and multiple government and think tank analyses confirm a substantial, multi-year buildup of hardened shelters and dual runway infrastructure at PLA airbases facing Taiwan, alongside credible reporting of large numbers of retired J-6 airframes converted for unmanned use. What remains genuinely uncertain is how reliable these mobile systems would prove under the pressure of an actual, sustained conflict, how much genuine survivability dispersal provides against an adversary with the demonstrated intelligence and strike capacity the United States showed during Operation Epic Fury, and whether the export ambitions attached to this technology will materialize into an actual customer base or remain, for now, a talking point attached to a still experimental system. Those are the questions that analysts tracking the Taiwan Strait balance are likely to keep returning to as more evidence becomes available.